There comes a moment when an avoidant falls in love so deeply that even their silence begins to tell the truth they've spent a lifetime trying to hide. Most women miss the signs, not because the avoidant isn't showing them, but because his love speaks in a language quieter than words. Stage 1 begins long before the avoidant even realizes anything is happening, and that is what makes it so misunderstood. Unlike people who feel attraction as a clear emotional pull, the avoidant experiences the early stirrings of love as a subtle internal disturbance, almost like an interruption in their self-contained world. They have spent years, sometimes decades, building a psychological structure that protects them from being too close, too dependent, too emotionally exposed. So when someone enters their life and begins to matter, the avoidant does not rush toward the feeling. They retreat inward and observe it like a distant phenomenon, trying to understand why this person's presence feels different from anyone else's. In this stage, the avoidant is not falling in love in the romantic sense most people imagine. They are noticing your impact on their internal landscape. Your presence creates a shift, a break in their emotional patterns, a moment where they feel something they did not invite. This is not excitement for them. It is disruption. It is the beginning of something they cannot fully name, so they analyze rather than engage, watching themselves react in small ways they cannot control. They might become more attentive, more curious, more present around you, not because they decided to, but because their psyche is responding on a level deeper than choice. This inner shift often shows up in quiet behaviors. The avoidant may linger a little longer in conversation, pay attention to details you share, or experience sudden flashes of self-awareness when you speak. They may replay your interactions later, not because they want to indulge in fantasy, but because something about the exchange unsettles their emotional equilibrium. They are trying to understand why a simple conversation stayed with them. They begin to feel a pull toward you that is gentle but persistent, like a soft knocking at a door they usually keep locked. This knocking is not yet longing or desire. It is curiosity mixed with caution, interest mixed with self-protection. For the avoidant, the idea of someone mattering is both intriguing and threatening, and this duality creates the unique texture of stage 1. It is the moment love sneaks into their system without their consent, activating both hope and fear, both admiration and restraint. At this early stage, they will not express much outwardly. Avoidants rarely show vulnerability before they understand why they're feeling it. Instead, they begin to look inward and examine their reactions to you. They might notice they feel unusually calm in your presence or surprisingly alert. They might catch themselves thinking of you during mundane moments. They may find themselves wanting to share something personal, but stopping just before they do, startled by their own impulse. These micro-experiences are crucial because they mark the beginning of emotional resonance. Where others might jump into romantic gestures, the avoidant steps back and studies the emotional terrain, trying to map where this new feeling fits into their long-established boundaries. There is often a shift in how they protect themselves. Instead of avoiding closeness entirely, they begin testing small steps toward connection. Maybe they initiate a message. Maybe they ask a question that reveals deeper interest. Maybe they allow themselves to be a little more present around you. But each gesture is cautious, controlled, measured. They are trying to see if they can approach you without losing themselves. This is the core of stage 1, the negotiation between desire and autonomy. They must feel safe enough to let their guard loosen, but not so exposed that they fear being consumed. This is why early interactions with an avoidant can feel inconsistent. They take one step toward closeness, then pause to assess their internal response before moving again. Many women mistake this stage for indifference, not realizing that for an avoidant, the very fact that they are still there, still engaging, still watching you with that quiet attentiveness, is a powerful indicator of interest. Their attraction is not loud. It is not fueled by impulsive pursuit. It grows in the spaces between words, in the silences they do not run from, in the moments they allow themselves to stay present even when it feels unfamiliar. This is the stage where the avoidant begins to sense the potential for emotional significance, but they have not yet built the internal trust required to move toward it openly. They feel the pull, but they do not yet have the language to express it. They feel the shift, but they do not yet have the courage to name it. This is the quiet beginning of their emotional awakening. Stage 2 is the most misunderstood phase of an avoidant falling in love because it looks nothing like love from the outside. In fact, it often looks like rejection, withdrawal, coldness, or emotional shutdown. But internally, this is the point where their attachment to you intensifies beyond what they can comfortably regulate. If stage 1 is the quiet awakening, stage 2 is the emotional disorientation. It is the moment when their internal system realizes that their feelings for you are no longer small, containable signals, but powerful forces that threaten the psychological structure they rely on to feel safe. This is where most women misinterpret the avoidant's behavior. They think, "He's pulling away because he doesn't care," when in reality he is pulling away because he cares too deeply and has no template for navigating that depth. At this stage, the avoidant feels a rising conflict within themselves. On one side is the attachment forming toward you, affection, desire, emotional resonance. On the other side is their lifelong fear of losing independence, being judged, being exposed, or being overwhelmed by someone else's expectations. The closer they feel to you, the louder their internal alarms grow. This creates a psychological tug-of-war where every step forward triggers an instinct to step back. This is why an avoidant may become suddenly inconsistent after a period of emotional closeness. One day they are warm and attentive. The next day they are distant and unreachable. What women often take personally is actually the avoidant trying to regain a sense of equilibrium. They are not withdrawing from you. They are withdrawing from the intensity of their own feelings. Internally, stage 2 feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. They want to move toward you, but the height terrifies them. Their desire deepens, but so does the fear of losing control. They find themselves thinking about you more intensely, missing you unexpectedly, feeling drawn to your presence in ways that make them feel vulnerable. This vulnerability activates their old survival patterns, the ones built from childhood experiences where closeness felt unsafe or unpredictable. These patterns tell them to run, protect, detach, and minimize. So even as their heart leans toward you, their mind pulls them back into emotional retreat. This internal split is exhausting for them. They may become irritable, quiet, evasive, or overly logical as a way to numb the emotional turbulence they don't know how to process. You will notice subtle changes in their behavior during this stage. They may respond slower to messages, avoid deep conversations, or create more physical or emotional space. They may start focusing more on work, hobbies, or distractions as a way to dilute their emotional intensity. They might joke to deflect closeness or suddenly shut down when a moment becomes too intimate. These are not signs of losing interest. These are signs of emotional overload. The avoidant is trying to reduce the intensity so they don't feel swallowed by the connection. They fear needing you. They fear depending on you. They fear letting you into the parts of themselves that they have kept hidden even from their own awareness. Many women interpret the avoidance retreat as a lack of care and react with anxiety, pressure, or emotional pursuit. But this only magnifies the avoidance fear because it reinforces the sense that closeness equals loss of control. The truth is that during stage 2, the avoidant is observing you more closely than ever. They are evaluating whether you are emotionally safe, whether you respect boundaries, whether you allow space, and whether you can handle their moments of retreat without taking them personally. They are not testing you deliberately. They are trying to determine whether their heart can survive the risk of being known. Stage 2 is where many potential relationships collapse because the woman misreads the withdrawal as rejection and the avoidant misinterprets her reaction as confirmation that closeness leads to overwhelm. The tragedy is that both people care, but both see the situation through different psychological lenses. The avoidance lens tells them to retreat when emotions rise. The woman's lens tells her to seek reassurance when emotions shift. This mismatch creates a cycle that reinforces the avoidant's fear and the woman's insecurity. But underneath the confusion, something profound is happening. The avoidant is feeling more than they intended to feel. They are undergoing an internal transformation that forces them to confront the parts of themselves they have kept dormant. Their longing for connection grows alongside their fear of it. They begin to sense that you matter in a way that is not easily dismissed. This realization destabilizes them because it challenges their self-image as someone who does not need others. In stage 2, love does not feel like expansion to an avoidant. It feels like exposure, and that exposure terrifies them, even as it pulls them closer. Stage 3 emerges when the avoidant can no longer outrun the emotional truth rising inside them. It is the stage where their shadow, everything they have suppressed, denied, or buried, begins to surface in full force because love has now reached a depth that can no longer be managed through distance or logic. Up until this point, the avoidant has relied on old strategies to regulate their emotions: withdrawal, compartmentalization, self-sufficiency, distraction, intellectualizing. But when their attachment reaches a level that feels undeniable, these strategies begin to fail. Love becomes stronger than avoidance, and it pulls their unconscious fears into the light. This is not a gentle experience for them. It is a psychological confrontation with the parts of themselves they have tried to silence. They start seeing their own patterns with uncomfortable clarity. They notice how they push away what they want. They see how quickly they shut down when intimacy grows. They feel the contradiction between craving connection and fearing dependence. This stage confronts them with the reality that their defenses are walls they built to protect themselves, but those same walls are now blocking the very connection they secretly long for. During this period, their emotional world becomes more complex. They begin to experience deep affection, longing, tenderness, and even admiration for you. But layered beneath those feelings are echoes of their earliest wounds. Moments when closeness felt dangerous, unpredictable, or conditional. These memories aren't always conscious, but they shape how the avoidant reacts. Love awakens these old wounds because you matter in a way that others never did. The closer they feel to you, the more their hidden fears activate. They might worry about losing themselves in the relationship. They might fear disappointing you. They might fear being fully seen, because being seen threatens to expose the vulnerability they have spent a lifetime protecting. This stage forces them into an internal integration process where they must reconcile desire with fear, openness with self-protection, longing with self-preservation. Externally, their behavior may look strange, inconsistent, even contradictory. One day they show profound presence, giving you glimpses of their authentic emotional core. They let you in a little more, share a personal detail, show affection without hesitation. Then suddenly, they retreat again, not because they've lost feelings, but because the intimacy felt too real. This oscillation is not manipulation. It is the emotional pendulum of someone confronting their inner shadows. They are trying to understand how to stay connected without losing themselves. Every moment of closeness forces them to look at the parts of their psyche they avoid, and every moment of distance forces them to acknowledge how deeply they already care. What makes this stage transformative is that the avoidant finally begins questioning their own patterns. Instead of simply reacting, they start reflecting. They ask themselves why they withdraw. They wonder why your kindness affects them the way it does. They notice how much they miss you during their self-imposed distance. These realizations act like emotional mirrors that reveal truths they once refused to see. They begin to understand that the fear controlling their behavior is not coming from the present moment, but from unresolved experiences buried in the past. This awareness is uncomfortable but necessary. It marks the beginning of psychological integration, where the avoidant starts bridging the gap between who they are and who they want to become in love. As this stage deepens, the avoidant's affection becomes more intentional. Even if they still retreat at times, their returns become more sincere, more grounded, more vulnerable. They may apologize in subtle ways, not always with words, but through effort, presence, or small gestures. Their actions start reflecting commitment, even if they don't verbally declare it. They become more consistent in ways that might seem small, but are monumental for their internal world. They show up when you need them. They listen more deeply. They let themselves be softer. They allow the relationship to influence them. These behaviors are signs that their shadow, once ruling their choices from the dark, is losing its power over them. What women often miss is that this stage is the real beginning of emotional bonding for an avoidant. This is where love shifts from something they fear to something they choose. They are no longer simply reacting to their emotions, but consciously engaging with them. They start learning how to hold closeness without collapsing into fear. They begin building trust not only in you, but in themselves. And most importantly, they begin to recognize that vulnerability is not a threat, but a doorway. In this stage, love becomes more than an emotional experience. It becomes an opportunity for the avoidant to evolve, to grow, and to finally step into a version of themselves capable of genuine connection. Stage 4 is the quiet turning point, the moment when the avoidant begins integrating everything they have felt, feared, resisted, and desired. It is not dramatic or explosive. It unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, as they start making peace with the emotional truth that has been chasing them since the first moment they felt drawn to you. After wrestling with their own shadows, after retreating and returning, after confronting the internal conflict between fear and longing, something inside them begins to settle. This settling is not the absence of fear, but the emergence of inner balance. The avoidant starts recognizing that their feelings for you are not a threat to their autonomy, but a natural extension of their humanity. They begin to understand that closeness does not mean losing themselves, and vulnerability does not mean surrendering control. This is the stage where their internal world begins to shift from self-protection to cautious openness. In this phase, they make a subtle but profound decision. They choose connection, not impulsively, not dramatically, but deliberately. This choice requires them to reorganize their internal framework, the one built on independence, emotional distance, and self-sufficiency. They do not abandon these parts of themselves, they reinterpret them. They start seeing independence not as isolation, but as a foundation for healthier attachment. They begin to view emotional connection not as danger, but as something that can coexist with personal boundaries. This internal integration marks the transition from reactive avoidance to conscious participation in the relationship. They begin allowing themselves to feel without immediately pulling away. They give themselves permission to want closeness without drowning in the fear of it. Externally, this shift is expressed through small but meaningful changes. Their communication becomes more consistent. Their presence becomes more intentional. They no longer disappear when emotions rise. Instead, they take a moment, breathe, and return. They may still need space, but the difference is that space is no longer used as escape. It becomes a healthy tool for emotional regulation rather than a defensive retreat. They become more transparent about their needs, even if imperfectly. They may say things like, "I needed time to think," or "I wasn't sure how to express this," small admissions that reflect growing trust. Their actions begin aligning with their feelings, and this alignment is a significant milestone in their psychological development. This is also the stage where the avoidant starts viewing the relationship as something they are responsible for nurturing. In earlier stages, they may have leaned heavily on their partner to interpret emotional cues, manage the pace, or hold the connection together. But now they step into the relationship with a sense of shared responsibility. They understand that love cannot thrive if they remain on the sidelines. They begin to show effort not out of obligation but out of genuine desire to maintain the bond. This effort appears in thoughtful gestures, quiet check-ins, showing up when it matters, or making time even when they feel overwhelmed. For someone who once feared emotional demands, these actions represent deep internal growth. Internally, they experience a sense of relief they did not expect. The constant battle between distance and closeness begins to soften. They feel more anchored, more stable, more capable of holding affection without being consumed by it. The fear is still present, but it no longer dictates every reaction. They start trusting their own capacity to navigate intimacy. They begin to see themselves not as someone who must avoid love, but as someone capable of sustaining it. This shift in self-perception is crucial because an avoidant cannot commit until they trust themselves more than they fear emotional exposure. Stage 4 is where that trust finally takes root. One of the most beautiful aspects of this stage is the sincerity that begins to color their interactions. They may not express love with poetic words, but their authenticity becomes unmistakable. They become more emotionally available in a grounded, stable way. They listen more deeply, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. They begin opening doors into their world that they once kept locked. They may share stories from their past, fears they've carried, or dreams they've never spoken aloud. These openings are significant because avoidants do not reveal their inner world unless they feel safe, understood, and deeply connected. This stage also reveals a softer, more vulnerable side of them, one that may surprise you. Their affection becomes quieter but deeper. Their presence becomes steadier. They begin valuing the relationship not as a source of pressure but as a place of support, growth, and emotional grounding. They start seeing you not as someone who threatens their freedom, but as someone who walks beside them without trying to control their path. Stage 4 is where the avoidant learns that love is not chaos, but companionship, not suffocation, but emotional resonance. It is where their guarded heart finally begins to trust the path unfolding before them. Stage 5 is the stage most people never get to witness from an avoidant, because it only emerges when their internal world has reached a level of safety, trust, and emotional grounding that allows them to express love in ways they once believed were impossible for them. This stage is not loud or dramatic. It does not come with grand declarations or sweeping romantic confessions. Instead, it reveals itself through quiet, steady, deeply intentional actions that communicate affection with more honesty than words ever could. By the time an avoidant reaches this stage, they have already wrestled with their fears, confronted their shadows, and slowly learned to integrate closeness into their identity. Now, their love begins to take form in the physical world, not as emotional turbulence, but as consistency, reliability, and presence. They stop fighting the connection and start nurturing it in ways that feel natural rather than threatening. One of the defining characteristics of this stage is emotional transparency. Avoidants are not naturally inclined to articulate their feelings because speech makes vulnerability feel too exposed, too irreversible. But in stage 5, expressing emotion no longer feels like a trap. It feels like a choice they are finally strong enough to make. They may still choose their words carefully, but when they speak, their feelings are clear, grounded and sincere. They begin sharing small details about their day, personal concerns, hopes, or thoughts they once kept hidden. They reveal parts of their inner life not to seek reassurance but to deepen connection. Their communication becomes less defensive and more open, reflecting a sense of internal stability they did not possess in earlier stages. Alongside this transparency comes a new form of emotional presence. The avoidant begins showing up in moments that matter, not out of obligation but out of genuine desire. They listen with intention, they stay engaged in conversations even when emotions run deep, and they no longer disappear the moment intimacy intensifies. Instead of retreating, they lean in, not recklessly, but with quiet courage. They feel safe enough to remain emotionally present even during tension or vulnerability. This is profound because avoidants historically use withdrawal to manage discomfort. Now, presence becomes their new approach, a sign of the internal transformation they have undergone. They understand that leaving creates distance, but staying creates trust, and they now value trust more than emotional escape. Their affection also becomes more visible through small gestures that reflect thoughtfulness rather than performance. They remember your preferences, anticipate your needs, and express care in grounded, practical ways. These quiet acts, checking in, offering help without being asked, adjusting plans to include you, showing consideration in their decisions, are the truest markers of avoidant love. For them, consistency is intimacy, reliability is vulnerability, presence is devotion. They do not perform love, they practice it with deliberate sincerity. What once felt like a threat now feels like a responsibility they willingly embrace. This shift from distancing behavior to nurturing behavior signals their readiness for deeper commitment. Another significant transformation in this stage is their approach to conflict. Avoidants typically fear conflict because it brings emotional exposure and the risk of disappointment. Earlier in their emotional journey, conflict would trigger shutdown, deflection, or avoidance. But in stage 5, they begin viewing conflict not as evidence of incompatibility, but as an opportunity to strengthen the relationship. They become more willing to talk through misunderstandings, take accountability for their reactions, and work toward resolution rather than retreat. Their ability to stay engaged during difficult moments reflects a newfound emotional resilience. They have learned that closeness can survive discomfort, and that intimacy is not destroyed by tension but shaped by it. Perhaps the most meaningful part of stage 5 is the way the avoidant begins to incorporate you into their long-term thinking. They think about the future with you, not in dramatic fantasies, but in practical, grounded ways. They make plans that include you, consider your needs when making decisions, and imagine their life with you as a stable, ongoing presence. They begin prioritizing the relationship in a way that shows you are not just an emotional attachment, but a partner in their internal and external world. This is where commitment emerges, not as a sudden leap, but as a gradual alignment of heart, mind, and behavior. What many people fail to understand is that for an avoidant, this stage is the deepest expression of love they can offer. It is not defined by intensity, but by reliability, not by declarations, but by consistency, not by passion alone, but by emotional maturity. Their love becomes steady, grounded, and enduring. They may never become overly expressive or flowery, but their actions speak with clarity. They have chosen you not despite their fears, but through them. They no longer love defensively, they love intentionally. And for an avoidant, that is the most profound form of love they can give. The journey of an avoidant falling in love is not linear, predictable, or easy to interpret from the outside. It moves through stages that look contradictory, confusing, and often discouraging to anyone who does not understand the emotional architecture behind their behavior. What seems like coldness in the beginning is often the first trembling of their defenses. What feels like withdrawal in the middle is usually the moment their attachment deepens. What appears as inconsistency is the outward expression of an inner world learning to trust what it has spent years fearing. And what ultimately blooms into commitment is not impulsive passion, but the result of deep internal integration. An avoidant does not love the way others do. Their love grows in silence, in hesitation, in reflection, and in the cracks of their carefully constructed emotional armor. By the time they reach the final stage, the transformation is profound. They shift from resisting connection to sustaining it, from protecting themselves at all costs to protecting the bond they have chosen, from distancing to showing up with presence and steadiness. The beauty of this journey lies in its sincerity. Avoidants do not fake closeness. They do not pretend to feel more than they do. Every step forward is earned through internal struggle, and every expression of love is a victory over their own fears. When an avoidant finally loves openly, it is because they have walked through their shadows and decided that the connection is worth the risk. Their love is quieter but deeper, less dramatic but more enduring. It is the kind of love that grows slowly, resists collapse, and becomes stronger with time. And for those who understand the stages, not just the behaviors, this journey becomes not a mystery, but a testament to the courage it takes to open a guarded heart.